Kate Colley, I've known you for a very long time.
Very
long time. It's fun to have you here.
Yeah,
it's really cool to catch up. I have been following your work since I've known you for a very long time, and I love all the work that you've done in a variety of areas. So I'm going to try to touch on all of what I've seen. So working with men, hypnotherapy, but where I want to start is the trauma piece.
Oh, great.
Because there's this video that I saw of you.
I know which one you're going to say.
Yeah, the one where it looks like there's like an exorcism.
Yes.
And I think you've described it as an exorcism.
Yes.
What it looks like.
Yes, absolutely.
And when the first time I saw that, I didn't really understand it. And then it came around again. And by then I had learned a lot more about trauma and how it's stored in the body. And then I came across it again at a later point. I think maybe you reposted it. And then it made so much more sense to me.
Yeah.
But I want you to explain what's going on in that video. We could also link it so people could see it. But I want you to explain what's going on and how trauma is stored in your body and what was going on for you in that video.
Okay. I love that we're starting here because we really just went to the root of everything. We could talk about the minutia and the stories and all of that. But like you said, trauma quite literally is stored in the body. And so in order to really wrap your head around something that looks like an exorcism, we also have to understand that humans are complex in a way that is different than animals in the wild. Because humans have this lovely, prefrontal cortex and this part of our brain that is beautiful, and it can create stories, and it can exist in the past and the future, and it can overlay projections onto a relationship, and it can write poetry, and it can create art. And it's the same part of your brain that lies. Same thing. So the human's ability to lie and the human's ability to create poetry is the same part of their brain that keeps them from releasing trauma stored in the body. So we have these different parts of ourselves. We have that very human part, and then we also have like an animal part. And really, truly being authentic, is aligning to your human brain and your animal brain. And then of course underneath that we have the reptile brain that just wants to fuck things and or run from them or eat them, and it responds to things quite quickly, but that's a little bit different. So in this bulk of who we are in the animal body, it's the same thing of like a zebra. And so the way that I explain it is, and I did adopt this concept from Zebras, Robert Sapolsky's work. I don't know if you know him. Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's a very technical book, but it's really good. And so I always use the zebra example, because if you imagine a zebra being a tribal creature with its zebra buddies and grazing in the grass, and they're in a state of obviously rest and digest. And their horizon is broadened. They have maybe a mild amount of alertness, and all of a sudden a lion comes out. So all the zebras are initially going to freeze, because that's the first response, but it's not the freeze associated with trauma. The first freeze that the animal body, and this is for all humans too, with trauma and also emotional trauma, but the first response is they freeze out of curiosity. What the fuck is going on? The next response is all of the blood flow will leave the digestion. The visual cortex contracts. It goes into very black and white survival thinking. And then that's when it starts to run, right? So it's all survival based. It'll run until the lion gets closer, and let's say the lion attacks. So the lion will attack the zebra's neck. And I tangent a lot, but this is why body language is so accurate, because anytime you see somebody play with jewelry or touch their neck, they're in hyper survival, and they're probably not aware of it, but it's just such a useful thing to be aware of when you're talking to people, I think, as a therapist, but also for self-awareness. If you start doing this, you're like, what the fuck am I stressed about right now? And so the lion catches up, bites the zebra's neck, And it's at that point that the zebra will probably go through anger. It'll go through the fight. It'll be like, this is my last ditch effort for survival. Let me surge all of the biochemicals to get the fuck this thing off of me. And if that doesn't work, that's when the freeze trauma sets in, because the body loves itself unconditionally and will never do anything against itself. So the zebra body goes, okay, I can't get out of this. I'm about to die. Fighting will make it more painful. So the body goes, how can I basically conserve energy in case I can escape? And also so that when I die, I'm not suffering. And that is the moment of trauma. That's when the neurology kind of freezes, and there's actually a part of your neurology that gets frozen in time. And then let's say, and this would never happen in the wild, that the lion is like, okay, I'm not hungry anymore, and it runs away. The zebra, if well enough to get up, which we're going to assume that it is, it will not get up and go back to the zebra tribe. It goes through a process of unwinding that trauma from the body. It quite literally has to unfreeze itself. The parts of the zebra's brain have to start to articulate and look around and be like, the lion is not here anymore, and it's safe for me to come back into the present moment. So it goes through this process that can look like an exorcism, where there's shaking, there's undulation, there's movement. A lot of it is like, the legs will kind of be like it's still running. So it's basically just moving through all of the biochemicals associated with survival, and then the brain functions associated with the present moment. When the zebra's body is complete, then it goes back to the tribe, and it never sees a therapist, and it never is depressed, and it never gets ulcers. And it's not that the memory isn't there, but it's not an active looping trauma state. And so what the human being does, because we've been socialized to not shake, and because socialization is so intimately linked to our survival, we need tribe, people, family, parents to survive, that we will repress and push down aspects of our authenticity in order to remain connected. And one of the things that we've all pushed down is this ability to release trauma on demand, which is the shaking. We don't shake. So anyway, so that's why I post the videos online as the permission slip to be like, shaking is really, really normal as a way of releasing trauma, and both shock trauma, which is more in the realm of sexual abuse, accidents, falls, military, etc. And then also complex trauma, which is sneakier and way more invasive and way harder to spot. But the trauma shaking will release both, and you don't have to remember anything, and you don't have to know what it is. It's like your animal body takes over. Yeah. And that's what that is.
And how do you access that? Are you hypnotized when you're doing that? What's the process for that? Because it's not as simple as someone just laying on the floor and shaking if they've never done that before. Like, how do you guide people through that? What's the process look like?
So that's a great question. There's different entry points into it. So I first experienced it sporadically, and I didn't know exactly what was happening. When like we were talking about, before the podcast started, how when I was pregnant with my second child, my ex-husband left abruptly, and we were left with nothing and no money and this and that. So I moved back in with my parents, and I had just had a baby. I had a 4-year-old. I had no money. I had no life. It was super rock bottom. Yeah. And I come back into this family household where I start seeing the complex trauma right before my eyes, and I'm living in it. So it was extremely triggering for me. And my parents are wonderful, and we've healed a lot. So it was all very useful to be there, but not comfortable. And so I start seeing this somatic therapist. And for 2 years, every week that I went to her, we'd sit down on the couch, and she would guide me into my body. So she wasn't hypnotizing me. I would be like, well, I'm so triggered that, my mom did this. And she's like, well, what does that feel like in your body? And at first I was like, I don't know, because I have no idea what I'm feeling. I literally, Alex, I did not know that I had feelings. Yeah. I didn't know they existed in the body. Yeah. I mean, it was wild. But when I started to connect to that, weird things started happening. So sometimes I would shake uncontrollably, or I would end up on her floor sweating and laughing and crying and shaking. And it's weird how there's these biochemical temperature changes and sounds sometimes would come out. So that happened. And then I started doing the inner work at home too. So, the kids would go to bed, I'm laying there, and I would just walk myself through. It was around the time when I was learning hypnotherapy. And I would kind of hypnotize myself. But when I'd get to that sticky spot where trauma was held, and you invite breath into that bodily sensation that's stuck, the same thing would happen. I would start shaking. And then it happened, I had a lover at the time, and we would have like hours of lovemaking, like just radical hours of lovemaking. And then I think it was the Kundalini. So he would always just know that like after a certain period of time, I would spontaneously go into TRE, and then that would be my thing that I would just do. So that can open it up as well. Obviously, there's a lot, especially for women, but I think for everybody, just stored in the hips and in the sexual organs. And so that just releases a lot. And I'll end it here, because the last way that I have personally gotten into it is I was learning body language from the top interrogator in the CIA.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because, body language is that key into the subconscious mind. And so he was saying, like, everybody wants to improve their body language by like taking up more space or doing different things. And he's like, but really, you cannot, with your cortical control your body language all the time. The best, fastest, easiest, cheapest way to create more confident body language is to release trauma from your body. So he starts explaining TRE, trauma release exercise, and he's explaining it, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, I've been doing that for years. And so I told him that, and he's like, well, I'd love if you gave a demonstration. I had never done it like in public before, just maybe with people or with a therapist. And so all, 50, 75 people gather around in this big seminar room, and I lay down on the floor. And it's interesting because once you turn on that switch, and it is like a switch. So once you turn on the switch in your animal body to be able to release trauma, like I could do it here. Like even talking about it, I could feel it start to want to come out. Yeah. So it's really easy to get into. So I just, for an hour, just shook in front of people. And that video is on YouTube. Yeah.
And when you switch to it, I think obviously it's because you've practiced it so much. So you kind of have more consciousness into how to control that switch. But what I gathered from how to access it initially for people is the commonalities between the different access points. What I heard was the safety around that. So the safety in the therapy room with your somatic therapist to access it for the first time. Because to your point, I think we are conditioned to not allow that side of ourselves out. So the only way to really do that is what I'm hearing is to do it in a safe way or where you feel like you could let that out without being judged or without being criticized or looked at as weird, right? Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. Okay. Yeah, you have to have that safety. Absolutely.
I want to touch on, you mentioned a lot about body language. Yeah. So talk to me about that and how you got into that, as well as I think what a lot of people are curious about, at least what I'm curious about, because I've seen a lot of your posts about body language. What are things to look for in terms of when people are comfortable around you or into you, or what's a sign that people aren't into you and are kind of uncomfortable around you? What are things that people could look for in either direction?
Yeah. So body language it's pretty easy because there's really only two types of body language, and it follows the same principles of all of the universe, that there's two types of energies. There's expansive energy and there's contractive energy. And so in body language, there's stressful, contractive body language, and then there's expansive, open, wanting to connect more body language. And the thing about body language is that you have to use it in context. So there's no really like one body language thing that means a certain thing, that means that somebody likes you or doesn't like you. It's more of like you're paying attention to the content of what's being talked about, and you're watching how that person is reacting in subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways. So contractive body language is anything where there's like a closure. So like me leaning away, that's my animal body, because it's body language. So my animal body below the surface of my human brain is wanting to get distance from you because something didn't feel safe. That maybe doesn't mean that I don't like you, but it maybe means you brought up something that created just enough of a biochemical stress response in my nervous system. So it took me out of that place where we can access free will. It took me into my subconscious where I'm just going to go through a set of patterns and operate unconsciously. And it might remove me. So that would be contractive. Contractive is also, this folding the arms like this is really, it's so socially kind of a thing that we do that it doesn't really have much meaning to it.
Could be temperature oriented.
It's usually temperature orientated or comfort. Blink rate is one to look for, when you're watching a really good movie and you're just, you don't blink a lot. And then if somebody starts to talk about something that is activating the contractive body language of blinking would be that it blinks faster and quicker. So you're looking for rate and speed. One of my favorites is this. It's subtle. So if you're on the podcast listening and you're not watching, what I'm doing is I'm biting my lip. I'm curling my lips under. That's often indicative of withheld opinions.
Okay.
That's the one I find most useful in therapy, especially on Zoom, because you can't see what their feet are doing, which are usually more accurate than the face, because we're all conditioned to lie on our face, but we don't lie with our feet.
Yeah.
But this one, these subtle lip movements will really show, I probably just said something that activated something and they want to tell me, but they maybe don't feel space. So I will stop mid-sentence and be like, tell me everything. How did that land for you? And then it's like all of this stuff. And then you'll notice all of the other body languages kind of start to come out. So you're really there's so many different applications for body language, because in a therapy setting, it's more of like you're looking for where they're blocked and how you can just invite awareness to that. In a healthy, safe relationship, I would say it's similar, because you can invite space into like, maybe what I just said triggered this person that I love so much. Let me invite their authenticity and their truth to come out. In dating, the early stages of dating, it's a little bit different, because it's like, first date and you notice somebody's feet point towards the door and they're leaning back, they're moving their drink away from your drink. These are all signs that it's like either they're wanting to leave, they're not into it, or you're talking about something that's just not landing with them.
Is there a way to invite them to be more open? Like, can you bring awareness to that in a way to make them maybe more comfortable or more safe? Not in a way to like manipulate a situation, but if I realize that I might be making someone feel uncomfortable, how can I show as to the point of like, I'm not a threat. Like how can I show you that you're safe around me?
Yeah. I would say if you're noticing that they're exhibiting body language that's not feeling safe, if you take a step back, or if you mirror their body language, if you mirror their breathing rate, if you mirror their tonality or inflection of voice, I mean, there's so many things that you can mirror. And then also paying attention to what causes them to open, so the easiest one to look for, that's so fun to look for, is the mammalian eyebrow flash. Do you know about this?
I don't.
Oh, okay.
Please share.
I just did it unconsciously, because now we're talking about it. It's funny, like when you talk about body language and then you're very like, well, what's my body
I'm hyper
doing?
aware of it now. Yeah.
But then we shouldn't talk about face reading. Kidding, halfway. Anyways, so the mammalian eyebrow flash is something that all mammals do. So when we're talking about the reptile brain, which is like the deep-seated, very similar structures to what is in a snake or a lizard, and it's the little part of you that's like, can I fuck it? Can I eat it? Should I run from it? That's about it. If you're talking about something, or if you meet somebody and there's a relaxing, there's an opening, there's a wanting to lean in, that information from the reptile brain will shoot up to the mammalian brain, and it'll cause an eyebrow flash. So I just did it purposefully there so that you could see it. But you'll notice it now all the time, if you were to ask me about like my hiking, like I love hiking. So you can see I'm leaning in, my eyes got bigger, my pupils dilated, my eyebrows are flashing, like there's light coming into my body. So it's quick, but if you see somebody do that, just talk about that. If you're wanting to open the space. And I do find that technique or way of approaching conversations has helped a lot with any type of social anxiety, because it gets your focal point of awareness out of your own fucking head, where we all like to live. How are they perceiving me? What should I say next? It's like it's so hyper focused on ourselves.
Yep.
But when you take your awareness and you like deliberately like just pour it on the other person, you trust me, you will not be in your head.
Yeah.
Because you're watching.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. It's like a movie.
We were talking before we started about the parallels between acting and the work that we do.
Yeah.
And because I've tried my hand at acting before. I still love it, but haven't done it in a very long time. You used to act as well.
Yeah.
So we were talking a bit about the parallels, and that's something that I got from acting. When you are uncomfortable on stage or in a scene, the more you focus on a scene partner, the less in your head you are about yourself. So that is.
See, I didn't even relate it to acting.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. That was something that I picked up from that I do apply in my work or in reading people or just in engaging with people out in the world.
Yeah.
So similar to what you were saying.
Yeah.
Very
so
interesting.
And it feels good. Like I feel like it's a win-win on all sides. Like the person feels seen and validated and loved and cherished, and it draws presence into this moment, which is just.
And it builds connection. Yeah. I want to shift gears now into men and your work with men. What the fuck's the problem with men these days?
There's no problem with men.
Say more on that.
Okay.
I think, so I was maybe being a little silly in that question, but
I get what you mean.
Yeah, in terms of masculinity, there's a lot of talk around masculinity. And in my work, I feel as though men don't always have a healthy relationship to masculinity.
Right.
Could be the way they grew up. It could be their relationship to other men and societal norms, or what we are telling, the messaging we're receiving of, this is what a real man looks like.
Yeah.
So living inauthentically, right? So how do you balance in your work sensitive, quote unquote, men?
Right.
How do you get them to lean into authenticity while still not feeling as though they are not man enough?
Totally. Oh, it's a great question. And I do think I always kind of struggle with this online of like calling a group of people like sensitive men.
Agreed.
Because it feels off sometimes, because it doesn't translate, but I'm not sure what else to call it, because I also feel like all people are sensitive.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
So it's just like,
I hate that label.
I hate it.
Yeah, but I also don't know what else to call it.
Same. We need to come up with something.
Yeah.
Like
we'll workshop it.
Yes. Because I think for a man to have to put himself in that box of like, well, I'm a sensitive man is actually not useful.
What I see mostly is the people that are labeled as sensitive are the men that have a harder time shutting off their emotions. And some men are better at it than others, but the men that I can't shut off my emotions, so now, I'm depressed, or I'm struggling to suppress them. So those are the men that typically get the label of sensitive.
Exactly.
In my experience.
Yes. And I completely agree, because it's more of an ability hardwired into their nervous system of how close to their emotions and how far from their emotions can they be. So I tend to find that, men who are quote unquote sensitive, it's more that they're just more acutely kinesthetically aware of the felt sensation of emotion in their body. but it's not that they're sensitive. It's not like a bad thing. And then the men that are like the bros or the alpha man, the toxic masculine, which gives a lot of masculinity a bad rep. Those are people that can basically have the kinesthetic, negative, out of integrity, bodily sensation in their body, the shadow, the shit that they haven't cleaned up from their childhood, the relationship patterns that are toxic. They can have all of that and they can still be confident. They can, because all that confidence is comfort. It's like a prolonged state of being comfortable in your body. So because they can be comfortable in their body, even though they have shit going on, that's what's attractive to women. Where on the other side is that men who feel their feelings, who can't run away from them, who don't have that ability, they get lost in that because they don't know what the fuck to do with their emotions, because none of us were taught what the fuck to do with our emotions. So their learned tool is to go up into their head. And then it's in the head, in the human part of our brain, where some manipulative tactics of codependency start to play in. And in the dating realm and in relationships, that's not sexy. You know, it's almost like why the quote unquote nice guy is not as attractive, and niceness and kindness is not the problem. But the niceness can be unattractive because there's an undercurrent of manipulation of I'm being nice to elicit a positive response from you, the woman, so that I can feel validated. And no woman wants that.
Because now the woman is responsible for taking care of the man.
Exactly.
And that's not a woman's job. That's not anyone's job to take care of someone else in that way, unless it's a child.
Unless it's a child.
Yes.
Right. Which then we can go into all kinds of, archetypal a mess around that.
So I'm curious, because it must put women in a difficult situation where women are having to decipher which men are actually confident and which men have just suppressed their emotions enough to put up this front that they are confident. So how do women navigate that from your perspective?
That's a good question. I mean, really, I don't have a real great answer other than the gut never lies. Especially if we're going into the realm of like any type of male social predators and female social predators, any type of that situation, the animal body will sense it ahead of time. And I mean, I guess in my personal world, I don't know if I could teach this on a podcast. The things I look for in dating are quite specific in terms of micro expressions and body language and the questions that I ask and things like that. But you can still miss it because there is this thing. I do have an Instagram video, I think, called like the 3 fucked up things about dating that everyone should know. But one of them is truth bias. And truth bias is a funny little fucked up thing that happens to everyone. You cannot turn it off. And truth bias is as soon as you connect to somebody, even if you've just met them, because the survival part of us will hold on to connection really over a lot of other things, it will delete information. And so as soon as as soon as a woman feels attraction to a male, truth bias sets in. As soon as there's a touch, truth bias sets in. They've even proven that if you meet somebody and their first name has the same letter as your first name, truth bias sets in. So you're not seeing a clear picture. You start to see what you want to see. And then if you fuck them, then the oxytocin, and then you're bonded. And then it's even more difficult to see it.
So then, that's a good point, because I've always wondered for a long time why certain people get away, like a good-looking person might get away with something that someone who may not be as attractive by societal norms, maybe they don't get away with the same thing. And I think the truth bias pretty much answers that. People want to let other people off the hook if it coincides with their narrative or what they're looking for.
Yes, and we are a hierarchical species, which nobody wants to talk about.
Yeah. We'll talk about it, please, please, because I couldn't agree more. Talk more about the hierarchical species.
Yeah, I mean, it's survival. If you can be connected to the people higher on the hierarchy, then your chances of survival are higher. And that, again, is not rational in like 2024 world, even though we can definitely draw a lot of parallels, but we have an animal body. You can't deny the animal body. You can integrate it in a conscious, healthy way, but you can't deny it.
And how does that then affect marriage? In the sense of if someone's married and then they have an opportunity to climb the hierarchy,
right?
What do humans do? Do you stay loyal, or is there a subconscious desire to stray from the marriage in order to climb?
I think that's like a question for probably couples to talk about and come up with their own boundaries.
Yes.
And it depends what your authentic values and wants and desires are. I think that like in a committed marriage or a committed partnership, there's so much emotional and spiritual growth that can be achieved in that container and only that container. So there's so much value in that. And I do believe that we are not built to be with one person forever. I don't think that one way is right and one way is wrong at all. But I think that like in the context of a monogamous partnership, knowing that side of you is there, but honoring it in ways that are within the boundaries of the relationship is the most useful thing to do. And so if you're aware enough to listen to the bodily sensations of feeling and emotion, which always carry very useful messages, if you're feeling that urge to stray, this is where people get fucked up. Is that the thought forms, the human part of the brain that lies, will be like, yes, straying is the option. There's a million fucking options you could do. The bodily sensation of I desire power. I desire to move up in hierarchy. I desire more sexual range. I desire XYZ, whatever it is. Sure, that can exist, but you got to be aware that the body is producing the truth. The mind is producing the lie.
Yeah.
And you can extract the truth and then open it up and be like, okay, if I desire hierarchy, how can I achieve that in a way that's a full body yes for me and my partner? Okay. What does that look like in the highest vibration?
Yeah. So it's basically connecting the values that you have to your being, to all of it, right? So it's a matter of, do I value hierarchy more than I value the connection within a relationship? Or how can I climb that ladder while having that relationship as well in a safe way that honors my connection to myself and my partner?
Exactly. It's inclusive.
Yes.
It's the and.
Okay.
It's including. And I think that's so important in intimate relationships and partnerships because everybody wants deep intimacy. Like everybody wants that feeling of closeness where you're so seen and you're so just that almost, and if you have trauma around it, you don't want that. But also at a core, I think a lot of people want that closeness. And the only way to be fully intimate, meaning fully seen, is to show up as all of you. And so if you're trying to cut off this part of you that desires hierarchy and power, and you're pushing it away, but you're showing up in the relationship as this, you're never going to achieve that intimacy. It's about like, how can I take this awkward, uncomfortable part of me, bring it into the relationship and allow the creative, poetic, artful part of our human brain to start making up ideas and birthing out of nowhere. What would this look like if all of me is included in the relationship and all of you is included in the relationship? That's fucking magic.
Yes.
Like that to me is like the only type of partnership I want to be in, is if somebody can like create art with me, even when it's sticky.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the blessing we have as a human, and that we're not wild animals, is like it's that creative process of expansion.
Yeah. So you're talking parts work, shadow work in terms of honoring all parts of ourselves.
Yes.
When you see a partner in a couple, if a partner in a couple is not honoring all parts of themselves and the other partner sees that,
right?
How can the other partner encourage them to explore those parts? I know a large part of it is individual work, but how can a partner encourage their partner to engage in that way?
So my hypnotherapy teacher always says that the human neurology will never reject anything that it comes up with itself. So that's one of the main principles that I use in hypnosis. It's kind of what drives me nuts about other meditations and other hypnotherapies where there's a lot of minutia and verbiage put into your mind for you.
Yeah.
I don't do that. I don't believe in it. And it's the same concept here. If you do notice that, obviously there's a conversation to be had and there's the expression of what that is. And I really believe that like in a partnership, because you're so neurologically and energetically intertwined, that if one person is communicating, here's what I'm doing, and this is on the table for you to do as well, but they keep elevating and they keep expanding, because it's that wholeness that happens when you do shadow work and you do parts work, where you're gathering parts of yourself that were so repressed and you're becoming like, it becomes magnetic. It becomes a vortex of wonderfulness all on its own, that if the partner can see that and recognize that, then they have the opportunity in total free will to step into that or not. And I think that that part is important, because I think a lot of partners feel guilty, or hopefully not shamed, but potentially shamed into stepping into it, or forced, or there's resentment or there's anger. And so their participation in the shadow work or the parts work is not their full self. And it's not going to work, because now you're weaving in resentment into the bedding of the relationship. And then that fucks up your sex life and everything else. And so I think if you do the work and you fill your own cup, you just keep filling your own cup, filling your own cup, filling your own cup, filling your own cup. Eventually, at least in my experience of working with couples, it gets to a point where that person is so full and that other person is just not doing the work, that there's no willpower involved in leaving the relationship or ending it. It's like a natural next step. Or, which is, the or is probably preferable, the other person kind of naturally, just by laws of the universe, starts to do it and see it, but because they've touched it and thought of it and accessed it themselves from full free will, it's far more impactful. Yeah. But what would you say? What's your opinion?
I think a large part of it, comes down to safety. And I really like what you said about guilt and shame. So I think if one partner is doing their work and exploring their authenticity in all parts of themselves, and the other partner might not be yet, I think if the partner that is doing that doesn't guilt and shame their partner, but instead is more inviting as, hey, I noticed that there's this part of you, or like, why don't we, inviting conversation around it, letting the other partner know that it is safe to explore that part. There's not shame around it. I think a lot of times those parts of us are rooted in trauma and are rooted in a lot of childhood wounds. So I think when a partner is willing to look at their partner's childhood wounds and trauma and not shame them for it, and acknowledge like, hey, that must have been really painful for you. Like, let's talk about it. And you can't force your partner to talk about it, but I think the repetition and consistency of not shaming them, not making them feel guilty for not being perfect, I think the repetition and consistency eventually sets the message like, okay, I do feel safe enough to maybe not jump into the deep end, but I could put a toe in the water. And then once my partner doesn't shame or guilt me around that, okay, I feel a little more safe. So it's scaffolding. And that's how I see it. I think it's hard you can't force someone to do the work. I think some wounds, some trauma, there needs to be an individual desire to process it. I think some wounds, some people are, in my work, I think some people, it's too painful. And my job is to make them safe and comfortable enough to be willing to explore that. But there is there's self-agency. And they need to also be willing to do the work. And sometimes it's not the right time. Sometimes it's not the right therapist. Sometimes it's not the right partner to pull that out of them. And that's okay. But If there is a willingness, I think having a partner or a therapist or a friend, anyone that is just willing to make it safe for them to explore those things, I think, that lets them know that it's okay. It gives them permission to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the safety piece is huge because, as you know, it's the moment of trauma, or in complex trauma, the many moments of trauma that are strung together that the body is removed from safety. Especially with shock trauma, there's that where it's an intense feeling like you're going to die. And so to even open up shadow work and parts work, there's a part of you that knows, like, I don't want to fucking touch that.
Yeah, for sure.
And you're going to have to just touch it. You don't have to linger there, but you kind of got to like, whoop, whoop, you got to get through it.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah. And I feel like that can't even be broached until trust and safety is established first. Yeah. So as a therapist, it's like, I need to prove my worth to them and from a trust and safety standpoint before we even touch that.
Yes.
So it's like, I build that in other ways, in other areas first.
Right.
And then it's basically, I prove myself.
Yeah.
And then through that, it's like, then we could dip that toe in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So totally. It's just, starting slow. Talk to me a little bit about hypnotherapy and how it works, because you've brought that up several times. So how does it work, and what do you feel like you access through hypnotherapy that is not there through basic talk therapy?
Yeah. So with hypnotherapy, all it does is it just slightly changes your brainwave state from logic, human mind, into subconscious programming and processing. And so the visual that is the easiest, I think, to wrap your head around is like, an iceberg, and the tip of the iceberg is your conscious mind. That's what you're aware of. That's your logic, your reasoning, your thoughts, just who you think you are, all of that kind of stuff. And then below the tip of the iceberg is the rest of the iceberg, which is massive and huge. And that's the operating system. So that's the subconscious mind. Because it's unrealistic, the way that our bodies are built, to be in our free will all the time. Like, it requires far too many calories for the brain. It would be exhausting to be that, it's impossible. And so what the body does is it goes, okay, I'll just run these subconscious patterns, whatever was there first, whatever was there from childhood, however that was hardwired way the fuck long ago, it clearly has kept me alive until now. So I'll just keep running that. Whether it's useful or not useful, good or bad, your subconscious doesn't care. It just goes, if it's there first and it's working good enough, let's just keep doing it. And so in order to really make a change, you have to access the subconscious. The subconscious really is the body. Like, I kind of use them all interchangeably. So the body, the animal body, the subconscious, the programming, I'm talking about the same thing. The limbic system, which is the emotional body, is also found in that. That's why you can feel emotions as felt sense in the body. So what hypnosis does is it just relaxes the conscious mind. And there's like a little, this is how I explain it. There's like a little man in between that iceberg, in between like the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And he's the critical faculty. And so when things are trying to get into the subconscious, he's there and he's looking around and he's like, no, not that. Don't tell me to be safe right now. I'm going to hold on to this pattern of shame. I'm going to hold on to this pattern of who I think I am. Fuck you, get out. And it's literally like trying to like not let things get into the sacred subconscious. So what hypnotherapy does is it just relaxes him enough, like gives him a fucking glass of wine. And so that you can actually take your cognitive free will, reach your hands into the depths of the iceberg, and with the highest love and intent, and this is hypnotherapy, then you start rewiring things the way that you want them to be. So that's how I view hypnotherapy, is like you're taking that, you're rewiring things, you're going back out, you experience your life, and you notice how things are different. Because when you start to rewire your subconscious, especially with hypnotherapy, it changes the wirings of your visual cortex. Which means now, instead of just being able to perceive this and have that make sense, now you're able to perceive this and that makes sense because the critical faculty man's like, oh yeah, that checks out. We're wired that way, so we can allow that experience. And you just keep doing that, and you keep gaining momentum with that.
Yep.
So that's how I work with hypnotherapy.
Yeah. Beautiful. How do you feel? Is hypnotherapy effective for trauma and rewiring? What I'm getting at is EMDR, in my experience, works in a similar way, where it kind of accesses this subconscious wiring. Do you work with trauma and hypnotherapy? And I'm sure you're aware of EMDR. Like, I don't know if you've practiced it, but yeah. So in your experience, how does it compare or contrast from that?
So do you practice EMDR?
I do.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's wonderful because the similarity between the way I practice hypnotherapy and EMDR, they're both somatic based.
Yeah.
And so anytime you're working with trauma, if it's not somatic based, it's not going to work. Somatic meaning mind-body connection. It involves the body. And the way that I work with trauma with hypnotherapy is a lot of it, if it's going to be around, well, even if it's around complex trauma or shock trauma, I always start with what's present. And this is, have you heard of like NARM therapy?
No, I have not.
Okay, we'll talk about that later. It's a good one. So there's a principle that I like to operate from, which is I just work with whatever shows up now. So I don't ever go digging for trauma. Like I don't go digging for past memories. Like I don't try to relive anything. It's not that flavor. It's what's showing up now, what's triggering now. And then you take your brain, you drop it into that part of your body. And then once they're in the body, they're in their subconscious programming. So that's when I start to kind of like weave in the hypnotherapy. So I actually, when I do hypnosis, I almost never do it clinically. Like I almost never am like, I'm going to hypnotize you now.
Okay.
Close your eyes and I'm going to count you down from one, whatever.
Yeah.
I can do that sometimes with my more broad hypnotherapy, things like on the internet. I will do that because it's an entry point.
Gotcha.
But with clients, I'm watching them. They're triggered. They have a micro expression. Their body language changes. Now I know they're already in their subconscious. I don't have to hypnotize them. They're already hypnotized. And then that's when I ask them, close your eyes, drop into your body. What do you feel? What's there? What color is it? Then I start asking illogical questions to turn off the logic. What texture is it? What does it feel like? Taste it, whatever. Once they're there, I'll go in various amount of different directions. But if it's a trauma-based memory at that point, then I usually ask them to get closer and closer and closer until all of a sudden you might have a real or imagined memory. And that's the important part because so memories aren't real. Nobody likes it when I say that. My son hates it. He's like, don't tell me that because he's so nostalgic. But what I mean by that is the way that memories are stored in our brain is that whatever consciousness you were at, let's say you're a 5-year-old, very different consciousness than adult consciousness. And you have very little perceptual filters. So things are just flooding into your 5 senses and creating a little bit of chaos. And it starts building like Legos. So there's different building blocks, and the building blocks are the 5 senses. So memories are built of like, here's the kinesthetic felt sense memory, here's a touch memory, kinesthetic external, a sound memory, and then this, and then this. And so there's all these building blocks. And so much more about memory because then some of those memories go into a deeper stored place in the brain. Some of them remain on the surface, blah, blah, blah. But essentially, every time you experience a similar flavor of that memory, or you talk about it, or your awareness is brought back to it, you change it. So some of those building blocks, without you knowing it, kind of get swapped out.
Yeah.
And then the creative part of our brain starts changing the story around it, and which changes the perceptual filters of it, which changes the 5 senses. So when I say memories aren't real, memories are physical representations of how we recorded a past event that have been changed over time. So when I access a memory, a lot of times with people that are working on trauma, they're not even accessing a real memory. They're accessing a pretend image of who they were at 5 when they think something happened or they know something happened. And they're just paying attention to that 5-year-old. And so in a state of hypnosis, what I do is instead of unconsciously swapping out the blocks, we consciously swap out the blocks. We have a starting point. What do you feel now? The 5-year-old is sad and afraid. Get closer to the 5-year-old. What do they need? And that goes into like all negative emotions are there for a reason.
Yeah.
If there's always gold in there, you receive the gold from the child. Oh, you need to feel loved and safe. Great. What would that look like? What would that smell like? And then you vivify that in hypnosis so that the body believes it's happening right now, because the subconscious does not operate in linear time. You get a new bodily sensation. So now the body has an experience of going from lack of safety to, holy shit, I'm empowered. Fuck that person, right? Or, you know, maybe not that flavor, but sometimes anger can be very useful in this situation. Or I am safe. I do have agency. You mentioned agency. It's basically giving them self-agency and then having the bodily experience of it and then translating that felt sensation. Usually I'll do it in a color, but I'll do it in a lot of different ways. And then moving that through the timeline of their life. And so then we just wipe out all the memories. And then I usually will call it future pace. Now imagine you've been living with that safety, that empowerment since you were 5 all the way to 5 years from now. Tell me about that life. And then that's what guides here's your homework for the next week.
Yep. There's a lot of parallels between EMDR and that.
Okay,
Beautiful.
I've never had an EMDR session, so.
Oh yeah, it's similar.
Yeah.
It accesses similar things. It rewires in similar ways. It's very interesting, very effective. Yeah, but a lot of parallels.
Oh, cool.
So I'm curious. I'm gonna come back to men for a second.
Okay.
How can men do this work? How can they get over the stigma around mental health or the toxic masculinity? How could they dive into this work in a way that, how could more men do that?
Yeah.
From your perspective?
I think they first would have to know that no human being can get rid of any part of themselves. And so if you are a man, if you are listening and you're like, oh, I relate to this and I feel my feelings and I don't know what to do with them, anything that is not inclusive of that fact is self-hate. And if you are in self-hate and you're vibrating in that and you're running that, you know, and that's a very blunt way to say it, but that is what you are going to be a match to. When you know, nobody wants that. And so self-love, real true confidence is actually owning every part of you. And so that would be the first step of giving yourself permission to just know that when you dive into these parts of yourself that feel shameful, that feel icky, that feel underconfident, that feel like you're feeling too much, your only option moving forward is to own those parts of you in a healthy way. Because if you're not owning them, they're going to own you. Like they're going to drive the car and you're not going to like where they're going to drive you. Yeah. And, you know, I do have a free masterclass that's all over, you know, Instagram and all of that for men. And that's a great place to start because it gives you 3 steps of here's how you start to walk into that pool of here's what my emotions mean. You don't get lost in them, but you receive the gold and then you take action on that. And I feel like for a man to do it in that way, where he's viewing it as with his testosterone and drive, I'm going somewhere, you know, whereas a feminine way, we might want to dance with it and move with it. And then, you know, call a girlfriend and get her on FaceTime and cry and throw things and have her witness me, right? That's not going to be as desirable for a man. For a man, it's I'm going into this emotion because there's something there for me. I'm going to access it and I'm going to take action on it. And so it's more of you're digging and then you're moving forward. So I think that's for a man.
And what do you say to all the people that because this sounds like a big undertaking to jump into doing that work, right? It's a lot of, you're diving into so many different parts of yourself, so many aspects of childhood and development. Yeah. What do you say to the people that are like, oh, well, now's not a good time for me to do that? Or they're too busy to get off that hamster wheel that they've created for themselves to actually dive in. Right. How do we slow down enough? What if people feel like they can't get off that hamster wheel right now? How do we get over that?
Well, all right. This would be a very blunt answer.
Go for it.
But, you know, human beings are far more motivated by pain than pleasure. We're always circuited towards that. Our animal body is always looking for the two options. Which one's going to bring me pleasure and comfort? Which one's going to be painful? Great. I'm going to choose pleasure and comfort. And so if somebody's on a hamster wheel of that, then they maybe have not reached a painful place in their life enough to want to willingly do something different. So I never try to get anyone off the hamster wheel. I just go, then that's okay. Then you can stay on the hamster wheel. But I guess if someone's listening to this and they're kind of recognizing that they're in that position, the way that these uncomfortable bodily sensations work is that they do start as emotions. They do start as feelings. They do start as musings in your body of discomfort. And you have full free will to really stop and start to pay attention to that little sensation of like, I don't like being on this hamster wheel. Let me dive into it, even though it's scary. And that's a choice that someone has to make for themselves. Because if you don't, because the body is a self-loving, protective organism, that discomfort will get louder and louder and louder and more uncomfortable. And at some point, it will spill over into probably a physical manifestation, a divorce, an addiction, a cheating scenario, a physical scenario, something that, and that's usually when people come to me, probably for you as well. They get to that place where they're like, okay, I can't ignore it anymore. And now I need to do something different, but I lost and I don't know what to do. So you don't have to get to that point, but most people do.
Yeah, agreed. What do women want in men?
That's a very good question.
Taking into account all parts.
Yes, all parts. Women, so there's idiosyncratic things that women want, meaning like things that are unique just to them, that you can detect through body language quite easily. And then the broader sense of generically, biologically, what women want is women want a man that can protect them. So we're not being attacked by big cats, but we are hardwired that way. And so a lot of times what that protection looks like is like, can you actually just protect my heart? Can your range of comfortability in your body be large enough to hold space for a feminine sense of chaos? And that can be very scary for a man because a feminine sense of chaos is probably like, what the fuck is that? For a woman that's embodied, that's like, oh, that's like play. That's fun. I can live in that all day long. But to be able to protect her heart in that way and hold a container and hold a boundary around that, women want that protective boundary. And they want the protective boundary even if it means, how do I say it? Like, even if it means that the man is setting the boundary. Like, something that I always really desire is like, I want a conscious man who can call me out on my shit, that I can trust. Because when I trust that he's done enough internal work to be able to set the boundary, then I can relax.
Yeah.
Women want to be in flow. And in order for a woman to be in her feminine, which is what she wants, the man has to be doing the masculine work. And if he's not doing the masculine work, the woman will take over the masculine role and she won't like it, but she may not know it. So a man that can show up with that kind of slicing, it's always appears to me like a sword, to be able to like cut through the minutia, to cut through the shit, to be able to set the boundaries, to be that protector of her heart, to be, a provider. If that's, I know that maybe it will be triggering because it's like brings up all kinds of feminist this and that. But honestly, women who identify as feminine, like are led by their feminine energy, want to be in flow.
It's interesting in the sense of it evolves, right? Because you said there's no big scary cats, but at one point that's all we had to do. And a lot of men, I think, like that's easier because it's just a physical thing. Like I just got to protect them from the big scary cats. So it's like the world has changed.
Totally.
We need to protect in a different way. And I think a lot of men, we're not taught how to do that.
No.
So how do we protect a woman's heart if we're never taught?
Exactly.
Yeah. So what's the answer? How do we learn these things?
Yeah. I mean, everybody has feminine and masculine energies within them. Masculine being the more expansive, feminine being attractive, masculine being light, feminine being dark. I mean, these are just different kind of symbolic ways of talking about them. So I don't mean it in girl boy. And for a masculine being to hold space for the feminine, I believe he also has to access the feminine energies, that soupy emotional chaos going on within him. Because if he can not manage that, but if he can be with that and still be driven and still take action, then his woman's shit's like not going to phase him. Like he's going to be able to hold it. And that really is the distinction. Like when we were talking about, you know, why the nice guy, quote unquote, quintessential nice guy is not attractive, because there's this sensation of like, if the nice guy is trying to get his needs met by being nice, there is a very biological sensation of like, yeah, but if a big cat comes, he's going to be running for his life, you know, like, because that's what the behavior that he's distributing.
Yeah. Something came up as you were saying that for me, where it was like, I think a large part of this comes down to parenting, or how older generations of men treat younger generations of men, because it's showing other men. So while we need to protect women's hearts, it's like there's a part of us, I think, that's afraid to do that, because then we're letting the big scary cats come in. So it's like, if I'm doing that, I'm not protecting in these other ways, or it's not safe for me to do that. So it's like, I might be protecting you, but now I'm vulnerable.
Right.
So now I need to protect myself. And I think what's coming up for me is we need to show younger men that that's actually not a weakness. That's protecting other people's hearts, and getting into that emotional side doesn't mean that you are more likely to be attacked. Like, you have to trust that you, I guess, have what it takes to protect yourself and do both. Yeah. And I think it's generational. I think men are afraid to access that because of the vulnerability.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's completely generational. And it, you know, what you're speaking to of that it feels like a weakness, or it feels like it feels not totally safe. Like then the big cat could attack you. If you do step into that and you do learn to be like, I'm going to protect myself and the emotions, it is generational, and it's also breaking thousands of years of just biological programming that you're changing. And that's the huge undertaking, which is why I think that a man who does identify with having feelings and like knowing that they exist, and, you know, trying not to use the sensitive man concept, is what this world needs. That's it. That's what the world needs. More men who are accessing that part of their neurology, who can be in the emotion and in the protection at the same time. And it's, you know, I'm not a man, so I can't relate to it in that kind of embodied sense like you can, but I know that that's a huge undertaking, because you're literally going against thousands of years of biological programming. That's no joke.
Yeah. And personally, having done that work, I could, when I talk to other male therapists, and I've had one of them on, Adam, we've talked about showing other men, like, the water's warm, like, come here, it's fine, it's safe. This side's great. Like, you can do both.
Yeah.
And I think so many men are afraid of that. And it's like, I just want more men to realize it's nicer on this side.
It's totally nice. Yeah, that's great. It's such important work, because they need to, men need to see, well, what does that look like? Yeah. Nobody's going to do anything if they don't have certainty about what it looks like, you know?
For sure. Before we wrap up, what's my body language telling you now? Analyze me.
You look relaxed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Am I open or am I closed?
No, I mean, you're open.
Okay.
There's nothing inherent.
Nothing glaring? Nothing jumping out at you?
No, nothing. You try to hide the fact that you're a little bit more tired.
For sure.
Than you really are.
You read right through that.
That's face reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've definitely you've gone through a period probably in your 30s or early 30s where you went through a massive alchemization transformation. And you did kind of speak to that, but just so that it's not me just being like, yes, yeah, I read that. It's you have the beginnings of these two lines right here that come out. So it's the beginnings of those lines. They haven't been there for that long. But it's almost like you went through the cocooning, like you were the caterpillar and you went through the darkness and became, the butterfly or whatever you want to be. You don't have to be a butterfly. But yeah, I mean, your body language seems relaxed. I think you're enjoying this conversation.
I am.
You definitely, as a therapist and how you want to be perceived, you're very soft with your words. Like you're very that safety. You're really good at providing. And then in your personal relationships, you're actually a little bit sharper with your words.
My wife would agree with you.
Yeah, and you have a really healthy, nice amount of testosterone and dopamine. So you have access to that drive, which is really great. You're overworked. Yeah, you don't have to post any of this, but.
No, I will.
And
I think it's good.
Do you have a little bit high or a little bit low blood pressure? Typically?
No. Maybe I should go get checked. I don't know.
I mean,
what are you seeing?
It's not fine. It's just a tiny bit. And
how do you know I'm overworked?
It's this line.
Oh.
It's this line and the fact that the left side of your face adrenals are more fatigued than the right side. That's why you're trying to you don't want to show it too much. And the testosterone is seen up here in the brow bone because you got a really nice brow bone. You have turn to the side for a sec. Okay. You have very extrapolative thinking, which is probably what makes you such a great therapist because you can take really broad, contrasting concepts and put it into a way and then deliver it in a soft way that's very palatable. And what else here? I don't know. I could keep going.
Yeah, please. I'm learning you are spot on for a lot of what's going on with me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. What else was I going to say? The eyes. Oh, yeah, you have quite amount of a good. Oh, that's what I was saying. The liver energy is good. You can handle your alcohol. You probably don't drink that much, but but when you do, it sits okay with you. And you definitely your default is not anger, but you are impatient.
Agreed. Wow.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Yeah. And you've lived a good life. You have really nice for your age, happiness and sadness lines. Those are great.
Thank you.
Can't stand when people Botox those out. Yeah, that's just here. You can see it on a narcissist. If those happiness lines go really, really high, past the eyebrow, and there's not as many downward lines, that's red flaggy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to pay attention to these things now.
There you go.
Well, thank you. Kate Cully, amazing to have you. Where could the people find you?
Instagram, Kate Colley, YouTube, Kate Colley, TikTok, Kate Colley, podcast, Rewired and Inspired.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll have to have you on again. You're fantastic. I could listen to you talk all day long.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah.